Good afternoon. This is a special day. Columbus State University is hosting the National Teacher of the Year, which it has done since almost a quarter of a century, since 1989. Been quite a time. A program started back then by the former Dean Arthur E. Justice. So we have a guest. We have a guest, Rebecca Milwaukee, who is a middle school teacher from Luther Burbank Middle School in Burbank, California. And so we're looking forward to talking with her. We especially think that English teachers and those who are planning to become English teachers will be very interested in what we have to say here today. So I'm going to let Rebecca introduce herself a little more thoroughly in a few minutes, but we also have with us one of our fine students who's now on her way to becoming a language arts teacher at the secondary level, either grade 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, or 11, 12 perhaps. This is Janae Senior. Janae is a graduate of Hardaway High School, a longtime Columbus site. Do we call ourselves that, Janae?
That'll work.
That's right. She now works with Columbus State University in enrollment services, but also has a degree in professional writing. So she's precisely the kind of young professional person that we're anxious to get into the classroom, and I'm excited to be working with her this semester. And me, my name is Dr. Jim Brewbaker. I'm the retired professor of English education. I edit our newsletter, the Education and Health Quarterly, which I enjoy doing. And I've worked with the National Teacher of the Year program on 3 previous occasions. In 1990, in fact, Janice Gabay was here. And she is, I think, of Filipino heritage. I'm not real sure, but she too was from California. And I got to drive her up to the annual convention of the National Council of Teachers of English the following, as her visit here ended. After that, I worked with Sharon Draper, who was here in 1997. Sharon is a very well-known writer, a formerly secondary English teacher from Cleveland Public Schools. And then most recently in 2010, I had the opportunity to work with and host Sarah Wessling, the most recent English language arts teacher that was with us. So English teachers, they're great, you know, I think so. Janae here is a talented college graduate, and she has not yet had any field experiences, as I recall. She's in her first semester.
That's correct.
And what I was wondering, Rebecca, what would you do to convince Janae and others that the middle school is where it's at as far as English language arts teaching?
Well, when I started teaching, I got a secondary English credential to teach at high school. And so my first 6 years were spent teaching 10th and 12th grade English. And that's what I thought I was meant to do when I entered the teaching profession. And I found the challenges to be exciting and a little bit overwhelming, because I encountered many, many kids who struggled with the fundamentals of English. They struggled to read and to write at a very basic level. And when you're 18 years old and you've got car keys and a girlfriend and a job, the motivation to stay longer at school and get reading instruction from your teacher or to get additional writing instruction just isn't always there. And so I felt in many ways like it was too late for me to help kids in the ways that they needed help. And after staying home for a few years on maternity leave, when I decided to return to the classroom, the only classroom that was available was a middle school. And so I went kicking and screaming. I had an unholy tantrum like you wouldn't believe. But I went, and my husband said, you can do anything for 1 year. It's 1 year. You can do anything for a year. And I believe that. And it took about 3.5 minutes to fall head over heels in love with those 7th graders. The thing that is so wonderful about middle school is that the kids are old enough to be able to comport themselves and conduct themselves in an independent way that makes them able to sit and function and be ready for the lessons that you have to deliver. But they still have all the childish enthusiasm and energy of little people. But they are also developing those brain connections where they enjoy abstract thought. They enjoy challenges. They enjoy breaking apart pieces of literature or pieces of writing and figuring out how they go back together or how to make their own. They're finding their own way in the world anyway, so taking them on a journey where they discover their own voice as a writer and being able to identify voices in literature is a really exciting time, and there are such fun parallels that you can illuminate for them. And then they just have that joyous knack for wanting to go on any crazy adventure that you're willing to dream up. If you tell kids, okay, here's a piece of chalk, we're going to go outside and we're going to draw, you know, literary billboards. Yes, yes, let's do that. Or here's a cardboard box, we're going to make a canoe and be Santiago, an old man in the sea. Yeah. Yes. You know, in high school, there's a lot of this. There's Mrs. Old Milwaukee, crazy lady, wanting to do, you know, they would, I'd have to
there
drag
she goes
them.
again, huh?
Yeah, there she goes again. I have to drag them. Middle schoolers, you do not have to drag them anywhere.
Yeah. You know, I taught middle school, and although it was a grade 6 to 12 school, and I taught both the 7th and 8th graders. And they didn't call it looping then, though I think that's the term now. And I found my 7th graders were kind of wide-eyed and gee whiz, and open to anything. And then by the time my 8th graders came back, they'd grown physically, they'd matured, they weren't different people, but they were so savvy all of a sudden, and it really struck me.
Citizens of the world, those 8th graders.
I didn't mean to cut you off, Janae. Did you want to follow up with that, or?
I mean, well, I was just thinking of like pursuing high school, you know, grades 9 through 12, because when I worked in the writing center here, I saw a lot of freshmen who didn't have a lot of college prep writing skills. And like you said, they lacked those basic fundamentals needed to pursue a college career, because writing is the basis of any subject, in my opinion. If you can't write and if you can't read, then you really can't excel. So judging from that and looking at that when I worked in the writing center, it gave me an interest to, you know, let's look at high school and see how we can help turn this around in our community, because we had a lot of freshmen and actually some sophomores and juniors, because, you know, if you skate by, you can kind of slide through college, you know, in some classes, but I just felt like without those basic fundamentals, they wouldn't be able to go too far. And so when I started looking into teaching, I was thinking high school was where I wanted to pursue for that very reason.
Well, and that's one reason we want to make sure that you have substantive experiences both in a middle school and a high school, because I think what I found is that many times pre-service teachers have misconceptions about middle school, and so it doesn't mean that middle school is for everybody, but it does mean that it ought to be, you ought to think carefully about whether you fit best here or there. And usually we try to give you a choice for student teaching. You've had the pre-student teaching experience at both levels, and so now you can make a kind of informed, you can express your preference that way. Yeah. So let's move on a little bit, shall we? I'm working with Pamela Koch, who I haven't met Pamela, but she and I are back and forth on email, and she's written an article that'll be in the upcoming issue of the Allen Review, which is an NCTE publication, and she talks about the co-teachers that she brings into the classroom with her, those invisible human influences that kind of mold what we do and how we do it as teachers. And I'm wondering, who are your co-teachers and how have they changed over time? Now I'm going to ask you the same question, Janae. They may not have changed a whole lot over time, but at least I think you have some co-teachers that when you go into that classroom, there's somebody there kind of with you, you know?
I have so many influential teacher heroes. You know, I think you remember every person that ever told you you could do something and every person that ever told you you couldn't do something. They stick with you forever. And I had so many wonderful teachers in elementary school who brought a creative bent to the classroom, and they allowed us to express what we knew through music or through drama or through art, or gave us choices and options for how we displayed what it was that she or he had taught us, and thus what we knew. And I appreciated that and brought that right into my classroom, that there are many, many different ways for kids to demonstrate that they've learned with me, that just because it's an English class does not mean it has to be a piece of reading or something that they have written, that they can indicate lots of different ways. And I also feel it's my responsibility to kind of see deep within each kid what their strength is, what their strong traits are, and help improve those, but at the same time kind of tease out areas that they're weak on and help strengthen them. When I became a teacher, there were partner teachers that would mentor me or that I would go observe. And it was not necessarily a teaching strategy or an activity that they did, but the way they conducted themselves with kids. One teacher in particular, Mrs. Birkland, she had just such a merciful stance with kids, you know, whereas I would get sort of hyper hysterical about kids not having their books or supplies, or missing a deadline, or not having work done so we couldn't advance, where I'd get a little bit hyperactive about that or be upset. She would find a way to harness that energy or lack of energy and turn it into something productive, or to not let it get her down.
Nothing like harnessing a lack of energy, huh?
I know. I couldn't figure out how I mean, she was reading the signs all the time. She was reading what kids were doing and what their experience was, and having that inform her next steps constantly. She never raised her voice. I never saw her angry. She just met every single challenge head on, usually swatting most of it away and staying true to the lesson and the course.
And so you're just like that.
Well, yeah, I saw that, and I went, first of all, I can stop getting hyper about the things that they're doing wrong. I need to keep my focus trained more tightly on the lesson and what my learning goal and my mission is for those kids on this day. That's not to say that what they're bringing in is not something that I can add into what we're doing, but I'm just not going to get sidetracked. I'm not going to let things derail us from the mission and where we need to go. And so Mrs. Birkland has been huge. My parents were both teachers, and my mom had a reputation for being the toughest 6th grade teacher in town.
Wow.
And kids were scared to get her. And I understood, having had tough teachers myself, what that really means when kids say you're tough, and I appreciated that. I didn't want to be a pushover. I didn't want to be an easy A. I wanted kids to have a rigorous experience with me that changed them. And then my father was the goofball. He was the class clown in teacher form. And that sense of mischief I also bring into class every day.
Janae, when she talked about the really tough teachers, I suspect that one or two particular teachers probably came to mind from your background. I was thinking of one that we spoke of prior to a little earlier this morning. Talk about your co-teachers.
I was in the IB program at Hardaway. We called ourselves the guinea pig class because we were the first class of IB, so everybody was kind of feeling their way through it, the teachers and students alike.
Explain what IB means. Probably there are people out there who don't know what that is, believe it or not.
It's the International Baccalaureate Program, and to sum it all up in a nutshell, it's a worldwide program that tests children in high school on the 11th and 12th grade levels on all subjects, and they're getting the same lessons, the same tests, and you're tested on a scale of 1 to 7. And they have different high level and standard levels and electives. It almost mirrors it's like a college prep program that has different focuses, and like standard level would be an elective like art. I did standard level art, and high level you can choose a core subject like English or math. And actually they might have changed it. You might be able to get high level music or art as well now. Okay. But it's a very rigorous program, and they have...
And one of your teachers in particular was
Miss Hale. Mrs. Hale, well, I'm not sure if she still teaches at Hardaway, but she taught me 10th grade English at Hardaway, and she really changed the way I wrote. She made me aware of the voice in my papers. She made me aware of researching and citations. Up until that point, from middle school until 10th grade, when I wrote, I just kind of spit out the information, put some quotations in, and that was it. When she read it, she would put the red pen to work, and she would send it back to you, and you would be horrified at your grade. And she would go through, she would take the time and tell you what you did wrong, where you needed improvement. And she was one of those teachers that you all were speaking of that you'd say was a hard teacher. She was big on us not using the word you. If you put the word you in an essay, regardless of how well your essay was, if it was in the last sentence, it was an automatic F.
Oh.
And she was one of those teachers that just really made you aware of what you were saying, how you were saying it, and just the dynamics and fundamentals that a lot of students miss nowadays going through high school. But she and Mr. Fletcher was another I had at Hardaway, who was very rigorous, detail-oriented, and they ensured that when you wrote, you knew what you were saying, how the audience perceived it, and the voice that you used in your paper. Was it formal? Was it informal? Are you talking to an academic audience? Are you talking to your friends? They made me aware of all of these dynamics that I think are fundamental for students to learn in their writing.
I guess I'll jump in. talk about my co-teachers. I don't think I had very good English teachers in high school. At least I found myself once I started teaching, I definitely wanted to be not like them. And oddly enough, my 11th to 12th grade social studies teacher was the guy that really turned me on. And in fact, I guess I was a political science man. I know I was for a time to begin with. And I remember that the assignment we had, it was a presidential election year when I was a senior in high school, the fall of 1956, believe it or not. And we had to identify a candidate, work in their campaign in some capacity, and then we got off on election day and got to go stand outside the polls and hand out stuff, though we had to be 150 feet away from the polling place. And in that, I also got to write it was a profile of my voting precinct and the kind of people who lived there and what it was like, you know, in a variety of ways. And that was probably the piece of writing I enjoyed most in high school, oddly enough. And so I think an awful lot of good English language arts teaching goes on in other classrooms, you know, sometimes even better than in the regular English classroom. In English, what we did was we memorized long lists of who wrote what. And our exam was trying to match up Shelley with whatever poem he wrote and things like that for British Lit. And I was fairly good at that, but I didn't want to do it, and I didn't do English on purpose any more than necessary at that point. Since then, though, I guess I'm more shaped by the theorists and the practitioners that I have admired over time. And I'll just mention one. In graduate school, I became acquainted with the work of Daniel Fader in a book called Hooked on Books, in which he went into a Washington, D.C. junior high school, and rather than work with textbooks and worksheets, he thought it might be a good idea to go down to the bookstore and get some real books for kids. And so, and believe it or not, those kids were indeed hooked on books. The problem was the teachers weren't so hooked themselves. They wanted to do what they'd been doing all along. So Daniel Fader is still with me in classrooms, and that's probably why I have such a passion for young adult literature, perhaps. Yeah. So there you go. Before long, it's going to be National Poetry Month, isn't it? What do you do that's fun and different and cool during National Poetry Month?
Poetry is a part of my curriculum year-round. I'm always looking for kids to explore that more expressive side of how language can get used and kind of come away from argument and citations and to use language in a beautiful way. And so I'm a big fan of public art and public expressions of kindness and gratitude and beauty and friendship. And I care a lot about my kids' character development. So often I'm also really big on critical thinking and how to get kids to mix up their thought process to find answers to things in creative ways. So we do a lot of found poetry. We had a huge raging...
Do you think everybody knows what found poetry is?
No, I think
whatever out there is. Here's a quick, this is found poetry. Take it away, poetry. Found poetry lady.
At the beginning of the school year last year, there was a terrible wildfire that raged through our area in the hillsides around my school, and so school was closed for the first week while they fought that. And when we came back, all the newspapers for weeks had these spectacular images and giant headlines of, you know, how many homes had burned and the danger and the extreme stress and trauma of this wildfire. And I had one of my students, one of my classes for the first kind of creative writing activity is pull from the headlines only of several weeks worth of newspapers, words and phrases and collections of ideas that we could put together to kind of sum up that 2-week period of late summer where it was so epically hot and everything was smoky and it seemed like it was apocalyptic. And to see what kinds of poetry, some rhymed, some didn't, what they could come together by cutting and pasting and organizing stanzas and couplets together about this wildfire. We've also done some really interesting poetry where I have a lot of junk books, paperback books that haven't survived over the years, and I always save them. And what we'll do is we'll randomly open a book and tear out a page and set it down. And whatever we've been reading, whether it's a short story or a novel, they have to look for words or phrases on the page that resonate with them as being connected to that core piece of literature that we've read. Like, let's say we read The Pearl by John Steinbeck, and they've torn a
Good California
page,
book, kind of, yeah.
Torn a page out of a novel that has nothing to do with it. It's maybe some Pulp Fiction or a Jackie Collins novel. And they have to circle words or phrases that connect back to the source piece. And then they get to decorate the page. So they circle. I've seen some of this done now on the web, and kids get to make art out of the space that doesn't have circles around it, and the words that remain are the poetry. And they turn that in with some of their final
It's okay to
pieces.
have fun in English class, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely, to make sound and noise and fury with words. And
Every
to be
now and then
beautiful.
it seems kind of grim, you know, when we're getting ready for those tests, right?
Well, my
Yeah.
favorite is when kids write poems to the universe. They can write a poem to an acorn or tree or their locker or their gym socks, and then we go post them. We go hide them. We call it kamikaze poetry.
I think Gary Soto has a poem to his gym socks, doesn't
You think he does?
Yeah,
yes,
right.
Ode to the Gym Socks.
How, you know, a lot of new teachers, I think, are a little hesitant about poetry in particular. You and I have not discussed this. Where are you coming from as far as poetry is concerned? You're a professional writing major. You probably didn't do a whole lot with poetry as a professional writing major.
I didn't, but ironically, I love poetry. As far as I can remember, I say as early as age 8, I started writing. I would wake up at odd hours. I don't know why. I was one of those kids, 2 o'clock in the morning, and I would have no one to talk to, nothing to do. I'd pull out a piece of paper and find one of my most colorful, sparkly pens, and I'd write a poem.
Lavender, I hope.
Always lavender. But I did a lot of writing, like I said, from age 8 up until now. And being a professional writing major, I didn't get a lot of creative writing or poetry, but I love it. I love how subjective it is. I love how it speaks to different people in different ways. 5 people can read a poem and it'll get 5 different interpretations. And it just brings out not only what the poet is trying to say, but it brings out the perspective and the ideas of the readers. And in the classroom, I think poetry can be a very fun topic because it's subjective. And you can have, you know, all the students sharing their different point of views and how they saw it that way and what words led them to believe, you know, these ideas were in the poem.
And I want to underscore 2 things I think you said. Poetry is something you do. It's not something in a book per se. There are poems in books, but it's an event as opposed to some text, right? Yeah, okay, good. I like that a lot. Of course, I lost my second point, so I may just have to move on. But I tell you what I will do. You mentioned the arts in particular as a way in which kids can represent or show what they've learned. Build on that a little bit more beyond the literary arts, okay?
Well, the world that my kids live in, the one they're surrounded by, is so vibrant, and it is colorful, and it is firing on all cylinders all the time. They are surrounded by art and music and writing and literacy opportunities constantly. And so to be the kind of English teacher that just relies on reading and writing to convey what I need them, what I know and what I need them to learn, is to negate and turn your back on the whole beautiful rest of it. And if kids are going to go off into industries that are so innovative and require creativity, doesn't it behoove me to make sure that they are exercising that muscle? So my kids have to be doing projects. They have to be drawing. They have to be dancing. They have to be writing poetry. They have to be videotaping and filming things. They have to be making joyful noise with language. At the same time that we're studying it and understanding it and writing and creating arguments and counter-arguments and understanding bias and stereotypes and digging deep into literature that's challenging. There are a lot of different ways that kids should be able to demonstrate that they've learned with me, not just one way, not just writing or reading.
Great, great, great. You wrote, I believe, I think I read a little quote where you said that this is not an easy time to be a teacher. Tell me more.
Definitely not. I was named National Teacher of the Year at a time, kind of at the end of a long span of teacher bashing, where it seemed as if teachers were to blame for the decline of the American civilization and every single thing on the way to the decline of the American civilization. We were responsible for failing schools. We were responsible for falling test scores. We were responsible for crumbling infrastructure. It just seemed like if there was a problem, the teacher got the blame.
You mean that's not true?
It's not true. It's not true. We are a global force for good. And so
I like that phrase, global force for good.
I think I stole it from the Navy, so I can't take credit
can.
for it, but I feel a similar kinship to their mission. And so one of my passionate purposes as National Teacher of the Year is to remind teachers who see themselves as such hard workers, such heroic strugglers in the mission of educating kids, who in any given day wipe a sniffly nose, bandage a skinned knee, comfort a crying child whose pet has died, sign a college application letter for a student getting a scholarship, given a passionate speech in front of the school board, made a peanut butter and jelly sandwich for a starving kid, counseled the heartbreak of another set of young lovebirds. I mean, you do a million things in a day, all of it good. And then to get into the car and hear some media report trashing you and identifying you as the problem. I mean, that's heartbreaking. That is really heartbreaking. And I just wanted to be a counterpoint to that. I wanted to go and share the message to other teachers of how heroic and incredible you actually are.
How about the teachers in the schools that don't make AYP on a regular basis?
That's my school.
Yeah, okay.
We miss it by 1
We haven't
point
asked
every year.
that much about your school,
Yeah.
and I want to hear more in a few minutes. But I think right now might be a good time to pause briefly and gather our thoughts, and we'll be back with you shortly. Hello again. Well, we were just discussing, or getting ready to discuss, and learn a little bit more about where you teach and who you teach, and what it's like to be a teacher in a school that sometimes gets on that list of the schools that need improvement for one reason or another. And love to hear more about that.
Yeah.
So go with it.
I teach at a middle school in Burbank, California, and when I came to teach there, it was the worst school in town. It had test scores that had plummeted and had reached a pretty low level of academic achievement. We'd had 3 principals in as many years. We had a sort of a beginnings of a gang problem in the community surrounding, and just not enough of the right kinds of people working to help make that school what it needed to be. And so when I came back to work, that was one of the reasons I had that big tantrum, is I didn't want to go work at the worst school in town. But I sucked it up and I went and I said to the new principal, who I'd heard really good things about, I had said to her, It's my first year back after maternity leave. I love my job. I love kids. I love teaching. I love principals. I will do whatever it takes with you to help turn this school into the best school in town. And she looked at me like I was crazy. She looked at me like, I've never really met a teacher like you that comes to the principal and says, let's partner together and turn this around. And it's mostly due to her leadership, the fact that she has the courage and the belief that every teacher is a professional and incredible and strong, and that she just asks us, what do you need my help with? How can we make what you want to do happen? That we were able to, over a period of 9 years, steadily grow that school. And every single year, our API and AYP scores went up. And we started, when I went back, we were at 560 out of a 1,000 point scale. And when I left, we were at 890. So
wow.
In California, 1,000 is a big deal, and anything over 800 is a great school. And no school is 1,000. Only the best schools in maybe Beverly Hills and parts of the Bay Area are in the 900s. And so to be in the high 8s and to have watched that renaissance occur at our school, where you had that perfect combination of highly engaged, invested teachers who are supported utterly by the administrative team, the freedom to meet together, talk together, grow, and think together as professionals, and a caring, supportive vision for the kids at that place where they felt safe and secure to grow and learn. And the interesting thing is that year after year, even though our AYP grew, we always missed a subgroup meeting a target by 1 or 2 points every single year without fail. One year it was low socioeconomic Hispanic boys. One year it was special education students in math, girls. The next year, you know, Hispanic ELD scores. We always missed it by a point, and so we would be in program improvement the first year, and then program improvement again, and so we would receive these federal dollars to help tutor and target kids who needed the extra support. And we did everything that a caring, committed staff does. We tutored kids, we had, you know, intervention classes, extra supported counseling, all kinds of extras. And still, you're not able to push every kid past the finish line that a test and a number creates for them. We just can't do it. If we could have, if money and passion and commitment could do it, it would have done it the first year.
So there are other middle schools in your community.
Yeah.
And did some of yours elect to transfer to one of those,
you know what,
so-called better schools?
Every year that you are in program improvement, you have to send out a letter to all of your students in the community saying we've been identified as a school in crisis, if you will. And because that is so, you have the opportunity to transfer your child to any other school in the community. Not one family left.
Well, that makes very good sense. It's not apathy, it's because they know they're in a good school.
Right.
That's my view anyway.
Right.
Wow. How, and I think you have a question, Janae, but I want to ask first, if I might, how is Race to the Top shaping this? Is it a different game now, or are we still kind of beating our heads against the same walls?
California, at the time when I left the classroom, the Department of Ed was only accepting Race to the Top applications from states. Recently, they've converted to accepting applications from large urban districts. And California applied and was denied both times that they have applied. And Los Angeles County has begun submitting an application on its own separately. They know that they will be denied, but they're doing it anyway in the hopes that at some point someone will have a change of heart and say yes. So right now, California has not been impacted. We have not won a Race to the Top waiver.
Right.
But instead, we're focusing on the fact that the Department of Education has not been following through on the punitive consequences for school districts that have grown and grown and grown and grown and grown, and then cease to meet targets, because when you're operating at that high a level, it's very, very difficult to push great kids even further. And it's quite realistic that you will miss your subgroup growth targets, and that's what's happening. And the government has opted not to not go after districts who are experiencing, and so to unpin some of those punitive consequences.
The government may have a little more good sense than we realize
I think
sometimes.
they do.
Janae, you wanted to talk about, what was it?
Yes, you mentioned how you can't push all children or all students, to, certain finish lines. I wanted to ask you, how do you handle students and parents who are simply not involved in education? Some students they get instilled at a young age that education is not important, that studying is something they don't need to do, or learning to read isn't that important because their parents don't read to them or spend any time with them or even dialogue with them. So they just kind of in school because they know that that's where they have to be. How do you handle or encounter or encourage those students that this is important and you need this information to proceed and, you know, get a life that most people want, which is a comfortable one?
I have all of those kids, and I have a special little boy from last year named Charlie who is that kid to a T. He has no academic role models at home. He has parents working multiple jobs and are never there for him, and they themselves are not high school graduates even. He has two older brothers who are often incapacitated because they are on drugs and not able to be a good role model for him. They don't have really enough money for food and for school supplies, and this kid is really getting no positive impulses from anyone in his life except me. And so the minute you meet a kid like that and you learn the backstory, you realize that you not only have to help this kid overcome an achievement gap, but you've got to start filling in the love gap, the opportunity gap, the good sense gap, the hunger gap, and you become really a second parent for that child or a third parent for that child. And you begin by telling a child that I understand that you haven't been given these ideas that education can rescue you, that education is a pathway for you, that education can take you to some place that is exciting. I understand you haven't gotten that from them. You'll get those from me instead. And so I begin feeding that kind of language and that hopefulness into a kid. The second thing I do for Charlie is put him out into the world. I start to make him see himself in a job that is exciting, in a car that he wants, with the pretty wife that he hopes to have, and to place him in that context where he can actually imagine himself as a firefighter or a doctor or an accountant or in the military. And so we talk about jobs. I show them pictures of different cool jobs that they could have. I talk to them about the assignment we're doing right now will give you this skill that that job needs. And I heard you say you'd like to be that someday. This is important. You can draw a dotted line from this to that job. So I start to put them into their own lives in a more beautiful way. And as soon as they get filled up with that, with my investment in them, they start to want to do something with that. You know, you can't extinguish hope and hopefulness in a kid. And the minute you can ignite it in them and you see it start to catch, then just get out of the way. Because I couldn't get rid of Charlie. He came in before school and after school at lunch. He wanted me to look at assignments after I'd looked at them 3 times. And I said, Charlie, it's fine, but is it an A? It's not about the letter grade. It's about, did you take away the learning from it? Do you have the skill?
I tell my students that sometimes.
Yeah, I know, it's not about the
We're all
grade.
grade grubs in graduate school, except for Janae, of course.
Yeah. So you have to be, they call it wraparound services. You have to provide to those kids all the things that they're missing.
So what percentage of your kids, I know Charlie is a real person, his name might be Charlie, might be somebody else.
No, it's Charlie.
How many Charlies do you have?
Too many.
Yeah.
Too many.
But this Charlie, I think, is a bit of a success story, I guess.
Oh my
You feel pretty good about Charlie,
Here's the brilliance of Charlie, and it doesn't matter what I gave to that kid, what he gave back to me, I'll never forget, because lots of times kids struggle and they want help from a teacher. They want advice, they want to know what the quick fix is to turn that D into a C or even a B, and you tell them what to do, and you even make space available or time for them to do it, and they do maybe 1 or 2 things and then realize it's hard. It's hard doing well in school. It takes time and effort, and I'm too busy, or they just quit on you, and you think, oh, if you just hung in there, we could have seen you turn this around. Maybe next time, maybe the next kid, and you hope there is a next time with the next kid. Charlie did everything I asked, every single thing I asked, when I asked him to do it. And we watched the turnaround happen right before our very eyes. This kid went from D's and F's across the board since the minute he entered school, reading at a 3rd grade level, but being 12 in 7th grade, and branding himself an utter failure. I mean, he walks with pride when he met me that he was an academic failure. In the middle of the year, we just saw him turn that whole structure around to be a kid on the dean's list with A's and B's, reading at an 8th grade level, and introducing himself to his 8th grade teacher as, hi, my name's Charlie. I'm a really good student. I had Mrs. Milwaukee last year and it didn't start well, but I'm a good student now and I'm looking forward to your class this year.
And so now is he finishing 8th grade as
Yeah.
far as,
Absolutely.
Yay, Charlie,
He's having a great year.
Great, Wow. We're moving into Common Core.
Yep.
And in English in particular, or actually not just English, in fact I misstate that, because The word is that before so long we'll be dealing with upwards of 70% of what kids read will be nonfiction. And I know that some of my English teacher buddies are up in arms about this, but this seems to embrace the entire span of social studies, history, whatever. So, but how do you react to Common Core? How do you react in particular to the apparent need to be working in more nonfiction?
I'm a huge fan of Common Core. The standards as I have seen them and have not had to teach with Common Core yet, but they're very akin to California state standards. California state standards are numerous and challenging, and Common Core in a way sort of crystallizes what's most important about what California was already doing and simplifies it for me so that I can actually teach fewer discrete skills over a longer period of time and really drill down deeper so that my kids are actually formulating critical thinking and interesting thought processes over what they're reading and what they're writing. So, and I've always taught in a way that embedded nonfiction, poetry, fiction, history, science. I always did cross-curricular activities and projects with my colleagues. I always asked my kids to read widely on a variety of topics and then to be able to discuss them and write about them and share out what they knew. So this isn't new for me. It feels very natural and the organic way that we should be teaching kids. And I always wanted for my colleagues in the other subject matters to be working as hard as I was on my students' literacy. And over the years that I've taught from the high school all the way to middle school, I've seen a total decline in what, and not everywhere, just in my specific situation. I've seen with the rise in the emphasis of testing and test scores, math, science, engineering, social studies, narrowing what they do down to what's tested and requiring very little in the way of writing or critical thinking from kids. Meanwhile, kids' skill levels sort of declined with the advent of new technologies that meant they didn't have to read the printed page as often. So you had this weird shift where all of a sudden kids didn't have the skills that they needed to succeed even in a 7th grade English class. But I didn't have any help from among the tribe. No one was helping me shore up by requiring writing and critical thinking.
The tribe.
Yeah, the tribe. And so Common Core brings that harmony back, that balance back, where kids are being asked to write and critically think in the other subject matters, so that it makes my job easier.
And I think assessment is much more sophisticated, probably under Common Core, and that's the key. The way you measure stuff has a whole lot to do with what you do.
I was so excited to see that for the first time, the kinds of questions my kids would be asked on this test looked exactly like the kinds of things I do when I'm teaching them how to unpack a piece of literature. I've never seen that before, such a nice balance and harmony between the way I teach kids and what I ask them to do and what they'll be asked to demonstrate on a test. I just stood up and did my own personal wave when I saw those questions. I'm very excited.
Yeah. Did you have a question, Janae?
I did. I want to add in another question. No, you were talking about what you teach and how you incorporate different genres in your classroom. How do you handle controversial literature in your classroom? In Dr. Brewbaker's class this semester, it's young adult literature, and personally, I was a bit surprised by some of the topics in the literature that we were reading. A lot of it's dark, a lot of it's
R-rated.
R-rated, that's a great way to put it. Edgy, R-rated.
Yes.
How do you handle that in your classroom?
My kids and their character is a really important piece for me. I want kids to walk out better people than when they walked in, and that means I have to model that myself. I have to model all the things I want them to become. And so on the one hand, we talk about what's right and what's wrong. We talk about how everything in the world has an ethical component to it that we should be discussing. It's not for me to say what's right or wrong. It's for us to find the right and the wrong in every scenario.
Which is a radical idea.
It probably is.
You know.
And that thinking people look at the entirety of a situation and filter it through their own personal life experience and their own true north of what is right and wrong. And I make my students do a credo project at the beginning of the year where they have to write their own life motto. And at the beginning, they're 12. They haven't lived enough life to have a really interesting, I know, get my homework in on time. But it usually ends up being pretty simplistic things. But over the course of a year's worth of reading, literature, poetry, nonfiction, I always ask them, does the main character in that story have a credo that you could identify from this piece of literature? And how close or far is it from your own? And then at the end of the year, our culminating activity is to look back and see if they've been changed by their experiences as a 7th grader at school and in their private lives. And so I tell them that you have a core of humanity in you. And everything that I share with you, everything that happens to you, everything you learn, you will filter through that core and it will change the balance, the pH of you. And we're going to read things that are edgy. You're going to hear language that's not appropriate probably at your house or mine. You're going to see people do horrible things to other people. And at every single step, we're going to talk about it. We're going to talk about how did it affect the characters? How do you think it affected the community? What if this happened to you? What if you saw that happen to someone else? What would you do? Think of your credo. Think of the character. So it's a constant discussion. Whenever we get close to really edgy things, I always touch base with parents. I ask them, I tell them, you know, what it is we're going to be discussing, whether it's suicide, bullying, teen romance and relationships, war, killing, you know, all that stuff. I talk to parents about what we'll be doing, and if ever any parent has an objection and says, this is something I'd like to handle at home, they're absolutely, with all due respect, given that opportunity, and I'll find other activities for kids to do, and I won't make them feel bad about it for 1 second. I'm not their parent, but I feel obligated to kind of shepherd kids through adolescence, thinking deeply about character and responsibility and right and wrong, and not telling them what it's supposed to be, but building their own sense of knowing what that is.
I like in particular your notion of the credo, and I'm thinking of when our class meets next tomorrow evening, Janae, we could very easily look at a couple of the characters out of each of the books we'll be reporting on and say, okay, what are the essential beliefs of this person and this person, and how do they change over the course of that novel, and how do these events shape the credo there. And I think that's great.
It's a great project. And one of the things, I did it as a quick check, but you could do it as a longer writing piece, is to ask the kids to identify the main character's defining moment when their character was revealed.
Right. We would like to think they have a defining moment.
Hopefully,
yeah. Right. Okay, that's neat. What are you going to do in your workshop this afternoon?
Well, I think that teachers
I
deserve...
should explain, I suppose, that we have, 20, 22 people who are coming this afternoon, and they're all excited about meeting you and working with you or having you do unto them. What's going to happen?
I really am a huge fan of taking away tips and techniques and tools that I can use tomorrow to make my class better, to make my instruction better, to reach another kid that I might not have reached before.
So I'll pick up something from you this afternoon that I can use in class tomorrow night.
I got
to stick with the credo idea.
That's right. I've got a million more. So I have a bunch of really simple things about how to run your room, how to conceptualize your classroom, how to organize things in your classroom, and little tiny tips that give a very big payoff as a teacher in your classroom that you would never think. And then I end with imploring teachers to give creative learning opportunities for kids that require them to think deeply, to work with other classmates, to be in the driver's seat of their own learning, and to encourage teachers to be more of a coach or a facilitator and not necessarily be the tallest, biggest, loudest person in the room, but instead to hide, to embed yourself in them, to camouflage yourself in the incredible cacophony of learning and work that kids do when they team up and work together. So I'll share some assignments that they can give to help create those.
You know, in our class, I hope you've heard me use the phrase, try to be the guide on the side as opposed to the sage on the stage. Yet at the same time, I tend to get a little enthusiastic and jump into the stuff that you guys are doing. But it's fun.
It is fun.
I love
it's a lot of fun.
The classes I teach and the people I teach. Boy, the technology is evolving more rapidly when you know what to do with it. Does your school have a particular policy regarding smartphones and this, that, and the other, and tweeting and the like? I am probably the only grown-up you know who, by choice, does not have a cell phone. I don't like to. Go figure. I just don't want to be in touch. And so even as we're planning to go to lunch later on today, I'm thinking, well, what if we're a little late and I need to call somebody? You know, can't do it. I'll have to borrow your phone.
Oh my God.
Anyway,
landline.
So, but more to that's what they call it.
Yeah.
A landline.
A landline.
I'll have to. Yeah. What about the technology? Is it your friend? Is it something you have to counter? What policies do you have in your own classroom?
Do you want to start and talk about technology for you?
I will.
Yeah.
Personally, I'm kind of like Dr. Brewbaker. I have a phone. I feel like I don't have to have one, though. They're great for communication. Like you said, if you're running late or pick up eggs on the way home, it can be a huge distraction in the classroom. And when I was in high school, that was when, you know, cell phones first started budding and everyone was first getting them. It was a great distraction, especially when text messaging came about around my 11th grade year. Everybody wanted to text each other in class, oh, this is boring, or what are you doing tonight? But in class nowadays, I've actually seen a lot of teachers incorporated into the curriculum. I know a teacher that teaches at Shaw. He teaches economics, and a lot of his activities involve, hey, everyone take out your cell phones and go to this website. We're going to watch this video on our phones, and I want you to answer this set of questions that I'm going to put on the board.
Neat.
And he does a lot of activities that incorporate their cell phones and what they have called My Big Campus. Which is, you know, it mirrors Facebook.
Right.
So they're familiar with it. He posts assignments there. You know, your homework tonight, go to My Big Campus, watch this video, and we're going to discuss it in class tomorrow. So I've seen technology make the shift towards a positive, you know, push in the classroom. But of course, because it has games and it's a communication device, it still can be a distraction. It just has to be limited and, to me, appropriately filtered in the classroom for it to be successful.
Right. Right, I totally agree. I know our school has a policy that phones are to be off while they're on campus and only to be used before and after school, but I just, I guess I'm maybe young enough or naive enough to believe that, you know, kids have in the palm of their hand a personal learning device that can harness almost everything we know about everything at the touch of a fingertip and quickly. Why would I want those silenced? Why would I want those off? Why wouldn't I just use them like crazy in class? And so I do. I tell kids, and I've established a relationship with them. They know me as somebody who cares about them and their development, and my expectations for them are huge. So they're afraid to misbehave traditionally. Misbehaving technologically is also something they're afraid to do with me because they don't want to let me down. But whereas in the past I used to have kids have to go home and look something up or go home and read something and then come back, we don't have to waste that day anymore. Now they can pull it up on their screens. They can partner together. Kids who don't have smartphones or who don't have anything can get together with kids who do, gather around the screen, read what they need to read, and then we go forward. We've been able to use iPads to Skype into classrooms and other continents and meet friends and teachers and do activities far, far away. We've been able to publish things in a way that I could never before with my students' work. I've been able to grab resources so quickly. When a kid said, oh, I saw something on YouTube that's exactly what you're talking about. Well, we just go get it. And it's so immediate and vibrant and relevant to their world. I mean, they're getting all these impulses and images quickly from 3 p.m. to bedtime. Why shouldn't part of their school day also incorporate that
They're probably
reality?
not as excited about it as we are because we can remember before all that.
Well,
And,
trying to tell a kid about the Dewey Decimal System and how we used to look up books,
is that still in the curriculum?
No.
No. Well, good. I hope not. Anyway, my goodness. I think our time's running a little short. I want to ask you one other thing. It's a slightly more serious topic, I guess. I'm thinking of Tony Danza's recent book, which is I'd like to apologize to every teacher I ever had, and this book was the basis with Tony Danza of a sort of a reality TV show in which he was teaching for a year in an inner city Philadelphia high school, English, by the way. I'm going to use this in a class this summer. Looking forward to that. But that also goes along with Thomas Newkirk's idea, which he puts in 6 good ideas to hang on to in an era of bad ideas. And I forget, that's not the correct title. But he says, you know, we need to be able to talk more about how hard teaching is and how we're not always successful, and that hurts. And there's that school, but over here, opposite that, we have the books, and I can think of several, where if you just teach harder, the kids will get it, and you'll become famous, and everybody will do AP calculus, even though they weren't so good in 6th grade arithmetic. What about the downside? What about a disappointment you've had? I bet you get to talk about your achievements much more than your disappointments.
Oh my gosh. First of all, I loved that series with Tony Danza.
And I didn't see it. I'm going to have to get it for my class.
Well, if you want to see him cry,
oh, he's a crier.
Day.
Yeah, the guy's a crier.
But that immediately,
I think it's an Italian thing, but that could be.
It's a teacher thing.
It's a teacher thing.
I think it's a teacher thing because it so endeared him to me because everyone thinks they can do it. Everyone thinks I could probably be a great teacher. And the minute you start doing it and you realize how incredibly challenging it is and how many factors are at play that you have no control over, and you're just trying to ride herd on top of it and keep it all going in a forward direction towards a learning goal where kids build skills, and so often you get derailed or so often something goes amiss and you have to just keep on plugging. And you collect successes along the way, but often kids fall off the road of success and they get waylaid or they get distracted by the temptations of being a young person in America today. You know, I've had kids. I had a kid who, his name was Cole, and he hated school, he hated teachers, he was a rebel for sure. He just had no interest in being in school, and he was one of those kids that you'd hand him an assignment and he would crumple it up in front of your face and throw it away. I mean, he would just challenge you. He gave you the finger every single day. And I found out that he lived a couple of blocks from school. I found out the hard way. The first day that I got his address, I mistook it for a street way across town, and I drove miles looking for this kid's house because I'd had enough of him throwing away my assignments. I was taking that personally. So I smoothed out the assignment that day, and I was driving it to his house. And I drove all over town, and I couldn't find, you know, this address. And I finally came back to the office. Now it's about 4 o'clock, and the school secretary says, "Rebecca, it's not Kenwood, it's Kensington. It's right there. He lives 2 blocks away." And I was like, "Are you kidding me?" So I parked, I walked right to his house, I knocked on the door, no answer, and I fed the assignment through the mail slot. And I did that every day for the next 2 weeks, if only to keep him from stopping, crumpling them up in front of other kids and throwing them away. Did that kid turn around like Charlie did? No, he didn't. Did he stop crumpling up my assignments?
I'm relieved almost because I feel like I taught that kid too.
No, we've all taught that kid.
Yeah, we have.
You know what?
And
he probably turned in 1 of 10 assignments from that point on. But the fact that I was on his porch, sitting out there, grading papers, shoving the work through the door, and I'd say, "I'm out here, I'm going to grade papers for half an hour. If you want to do this and send it back through the slot, I'll collect it."
And you know, maybe he didn't fail life, even if he failed or essentially failed school.
No kid
because there are people who succeed in the larger sense.
Absolutely.
They live life well, they are good to their mama,
Absolutely.
and they pat the dog and so forth. Well, did you want to add anything to that, Janae? I know it's just sort of a topic that sort of popped up there, I suppose.
Oh no, she pretty much hit it on the head. The question I asked earlier about students that are hard to reach, that's just the interest of mine because I see it a lot in the community and even in the people around me. Some of my younger cousins, you know, they're in school now and they're failing, and you try to talk to them and they just want to go play outside, and it's like, no, you need this. You need to know what the T-I-O-N sound makes at the end of a word, and it's just something that you have to hammer at and not give up on and keep pecking at it.
With those kids' teachers too, and the kids need that. The teachers need it too. Well, look, this has been a really fabulous conversation, I think. I want to thank Janae for her participation, and I certainly want to thank